Hello, good day. You're all welcome to the Ladder Back Down's CISSP workshop with a difference. Today's workshop is intending to share with us what a certified information system security professional would do, not only during their examination, but more importantly, on the job. I'm not a fan of brain dumps. I'm not indeed a fan of simply reading about tasks and responsibilities. I'm an advocate for professionals actually knowing what they need to do on the job. The cyber security industry is teeming with certified professionals. We have millions of certified professionals. However, the fact that cyber criminals seem to be gaining an upper hand, seem to be causing daily disruption to organizations, would suggest that they're not scared of our certifications. They're not scared of our experience. Cyber criminals are interested in one thing only, and that is to gain unauthorized access to our information assets. In society, in corporations, and indeed on our personal computers to facilitate identity theft. And that's why this workshop, which will be delivered over the course of the next 4 weeks, is not just intending to discuss the examination, the CISSP examination. Rather, it's to try and encourage each and every one of you delegates to join in this global battle against cybercrime. The 8 domains of the CISSP CBk and examination are security and risk management, asset security, security architecture and engineering, communications and network security, identity and access management. Now, if an organization is unable to manage the identity of its users, authorized users, then it will be unable to identify when an unauthorized user is attempting to access the infrastructure. So identity and access management is a very important domain and a very interesting career choice as well. Security assessment and testing will be covered, SecOps or security operations, and software development security or application development security. A lot of information security breaches are caused within organizations simply because they've gone and developed or purchased applications that have not been developed with information security at the heart of the design of the application. There is a concept called security by design, which we'll be discussing later on in these sessions. Risk management is essential. If you're a cybersecurity professional or any professional, actually, IT professional, HR professional, marketing professional, you're going into work every day to manage risk. An HR professional will be managing people risk. An IT professional will be managing technology risk. So risk management is at the core of what we go into work to do every single day. What are the certification requirements for CISSP candidates? Well, we're required to have 5 years of direct full-time security work experience in 2 of the 8 domains that we've just been through there. If we don't have those 5 years of direct full-time security work experience, or 4 years if we have a related degree, then we can become an associate of ISC squared after we've taken, sat, and passed the examination. The examination minimum scores are 700 out of 1,000 points. And once we've passed the examination, if we have the experience required, then we need to go through an endorsement process where an existing CISSP member in good standing, who is currently certified with the ISC squared, needs to then endorse you. Once you've been endorsed, you're then required to maintain your CISSP certification, which is done by paying an annual dues and recertifying every 3 years, which means that we simply have to obtain 120 CPE credits over the course of 3 years. We can obtain those credits by attending webinars, seminars, reading books, writing articles, delivering training. So there are multiple ways to actually maintain our certification and recertify every 3 years. And that doesn't involve resitting an examination. With the CISSP professional, regardless of how much knowledge or skill we may attain, we may actually hold, not only from a reading towards this examination, no matter how many certifications we may hold, human safety, that is physical security, always comes first. In our workplaces, human safety always comes first. And the business needs trump information security. So the business needs, we are in the business of enabling our businesses and our companies to operate, to run a profitable organization. We're not in the business of trying to put blockers in the way of our colleagues who are simply going into work on a daily basis, trying to deliver their objectives. As InfoSec professionals, we should always ask the question, how may I help you to deliver what you're trying to do in a secure manner, rather than simply saying, no, you cannot do that because that is not a secure way of doing things. Let's get used to offering alternatives. Within our organizations, it's about top-down security, which means that it's essential that we seek to obtain management buy-in, management commitment to information security. If management is not behind the information security program, then it's prone to failure. So it must be led and championed by senior management. There are different professional concentrations for the CISSP candidate to consider. The security architect, if you're really interested in architecture, then you could consider sitting the ISAP exam, and then you would get a role where you'd be primarily responsible for identity and access management, infrastructure and app security, and SecOps. The ISAP examination is for the technical security engineers who are interested in designing the infrastructure, designing a secure infrastructure, implementing security systems, verification and validation, change management, ensuring that when a router config is changed, that it doesn't cause disruption to the business, and secure disposal of systems. So there is a systems or applications life cycle, which start from the design phase and only ends once the system or application has been securely disposed of. Without any risk of a third party recovering that disposed of system and recovering private or confidential information from that system. So until the system or application has been securely disposed of, we have not completed our job as a security professional. Then there's also the ISSMP concentration, where you have leadership and business managers, information security managers now, systems lifecycle management, risk management, threat intelligence, and compliance. So there are many opportunities in the industry to thrive, whether you're a technical minded professional or a management or leadership minded professional. But the most important thing beyond these exams is that we're able to do our jobs and reduce the risk of a security breach to our organizations. In domain 1, we'll be discussing security and risk management, including the frameworks, policies, concepts, and everything that has been stated here. We'll also be looking at how we can assess or evaluate the effectiveness of what we go into work to do. We'll be taking a look at governance, which is the remit of the senior management team, and then there are other structures below the senior management team that are responsible for information security and risk management within our businesses. We'll be taking a look at organizational behavior and security awareness. So we'll move straight on to all of these, starting from the CIA triad, or confidentiality, integrity, and availability of our information. What is confidentiality? How do we ensure confidentiality within our businesses? Confidentiality requires a concerted effort to prevent the disclosure of information within our businesses to unauthorized individuals. Who are unauthorized individuals? Those could be insiders or external humans who don't have a need or a right to see the information that we're seeking to protect. We could have sensitive information within our companies that we need to protect, which would be harmful to our organization if this were to be released to unauthorized individuals. We could also have secret information. If you work for an aircraft manufacturing firm, for example, their aircraft designs would remain secret to them. And that would need to be protected by the information security team. Then some organizations, most organizations actually, would be processing personal or personal identifiable information that is protected by privacy laws, such as the GDPR, the EU GDPR, the UK Data Protection Act, HIPAA for health records in the US. So when we're looking at confidentiality, It's about ensuring that only the right individuals who have a need to view that information have access to that information. Integrity. What might affect the integrity of information? Well, accidental or deliberate modification of systems or data will affect the integrity of the information processed within an organization. The integrity of the data helps to determine the amount of trust that can be placed in the data or in a system. Decision makers need to have accurate information to hand to enable them to make decisions. Let's consider a company's board. A company's board is required to sign off on the annual financial statements of accounts or earnings for the company. If a finance accountant or administrator were to accidentally or deliberately present the board with last year's figures instead of this year's figures, that information would be unreliable. It would not be relevant because it's for the previous year, and it would not be usable as well. Presenting the business with inaccurate information or allowing a cyber criminal to alter or modify information could lead to the wrong decisions being made by decision makers. So one of our responsibilities is to preserve the integrity of the information assets that we have been hired to protect. Availability. Again, one of our responsibilities is to ensure high availability, to reduce downtime in the event of an attack or an error causing an outage. We could have a system error where a system fails or a component fails within a system. Again, it's our responsibility as information security professionals to ensure that we have plans in place to recover those systems promptly. We have backup systems in place to maintain high availability, which has actually been made a lot easier due to the cloud. Redundancy and backups, clusters, all of those have been made a lot easier to achieve due to the cloud. And we will be discussing the cloud later. But we need to ask ourselves, what would it take for our business to continue to thrive? And what might it take to bring this business down if I were to not do my job properly as an information security professional? How long can my business last without this critical system remaining online? Let's look at Amazon, for example. How long could Amazon last as an organization if its customer order system were to go offline? due to an error or due to a malicious attack, denial of service attack against its customer order system. So we need to put in an effort to prevent the disruption of operations by ensuring that we're recommending and implementing high availability systems. We will talk about disaster recovery planning and business continuity management separately during this session. The antonym or the opposite for the CIA triad is DAD, or disclosure, alteration, and denial. So any malicious or erroneous alteration would result in a loss of integrity of our information. Any disclosure to the wrong persons, to unauthorized persons, would result in a breach of confidentiality. If we disclose our financial statements to the wrong persons before the financial statements are made public, that is a breach of confidentiality. Because when a company is preparing its financial statements of accounts for a particular year, let's say that their year end is in March each year, whilst the finance director is preparing those statements of accounts, there will be a requirement for only the finance chief, potentially the CEO, and a few other persons to need to know the contents of that financial statement. If that financial statement of accounts is made available to anyone outside of that limited circle of people that needs to know the contents, then that is a breach of confidentiality. That is an unauthorized disclosure. And then if we consider the opposite of availability, that is destruction or denial. Destruction, that could occur if a user accidentally deletes a critical file or folder and there has been no backup taken of that information in the folder or file. Could be someone has deliberately deleted information that is now no longer available. That is destruction, and that is the antonym of that information actually being available. And then denial. Of course, we may have heard about denial of service attacks. And we'll be talking about how cyber criminals achieve this later on in this workshop. But briefly, a denial of service attack is where criminals seek to send multiple packets, multiple bits of information to a web server to try and prevent authorized users, legitimate users, from accessing that same server. They flood a system with packets until the system is unable to cope with the amount of traffic that it is being bombarded with. We'll talk about that later, but that essentially is what a denial of service attack is about. Why do we need governance? Governance is about ensuring that an organization has sufficient risk mitigation actions in place. As long as a company is in business, and that is any business, then they will face inherent risks. There is a risk to absolutely everything that we do in life, including business. So the essence of risk management is not to eradicate risk. It's to reduce the potential impact of the risk if it were to materialize, or to reduce the probability or likelihood of the risk actually materializing in the first instance. So governance needs to be in place to ensure that adequate risk mitigation actions are being implemented after risks have been identified and logged. So governance is there to ask questions. What are we doing about those risks? What should we do about those risks? And once a decision has been reached about what should be done, governance also monitors to ensure that we are doing what we have said we will do in InfoSec to mitigate those risks, to reduce the probability or the likelihood of the risk materializing. Governance also exists to make sure that there is an appropriate delegation of any funds available for the InfoSec programs, ensuring that the right programs are invested in, not just the right technology tools, information security tools, but also training, ensuring that the right skilled staff are working in information security and risk management. Governance also exists to ensure that senior management retain oversight of the corporate InfoSec program. Why senior management? Well, that's because they are actually accountable to regulators, to shareholders, to lawmakers. They're accountable. Senior management is accountable for information security risk. That's why they need to retain that oversight, maintain the oversight into what's going on. Senior management can't afford to say information security is just a department or a team. Information and cyber risk actually is one of the top 3 risks to most organizations nowadays. That's why SMT need to retain that oversight into what's going on and ensure that risks are being mitigated and implemented. If an organization is publicly backed, then they will have shareholders. If they're publicly traded, they'll have shareholders. The board is accountable to the shareholders, and they will report to the shareholders in the annual in the annual meeting, in the AGM, the annual general meeting. The board reports to the shareholders. The CEO will report to the board, and then you'll have, in many organizations, you'll have an information security committee that is made up of team managers, business unit managers, where they come to these meetings and they discuss information security, and they then champion information security within their teams. Then we have the Chief Information Security Officer, or whatever title an organization may choose to give it CISO. And then we have the Information Security Team. And then we have employees, we have contractors, consultants, vendors, third parties. But everyone in this governance chart here is responsible for information security. It's not just the responsibility of the IT or InfoSec team. Everyone is responsible. So here's just a repeat of what I said just now. 100% security is a myth. A company that wants to achieve 100% security simply needs to close its doors. So when we talk about security and risk management, it's not about eliminating all of our risks. It's about identifying our risks and then prioritizing any risk mitigation or risk treatment actions based upon the board and the senior management team's risk appetite. How much risk are we prepared to tolerate so we can continue to do business? There is always going to be that inherent risk of doing business. So the board will set a risk appetite. This is how much risk we're prepared to tolerate for us to continue to do business, to accept. If we're not prepared to accept any risk, then that means we can't continue to do business. So prioritization is based upon the corporate risk appetite, the cost of the controls that information security will recommend that the board, senior management invests in to reduce the risk or to treat the risk. So prioritization is based upon the corporate risk appetite, the cost of controls. Let's say, for example, we know that we face a risk of a denial of service attack, for example. We may want to actually request that the business brings in more technologies, firewalls, routers, cluster servers, different technologies. Now, the senior management team will consider the cost of the controls, the cost of those technologies that we've requested should be brought in against the benefits to be derived if they were to invest in those technologies. So prioritization is based upon the corporate risk appetite, and we will talk about this when we talk about risk management itself. The corporate risk appetite, and then the cost of the controls that InfoSec is recommending to senior management that they need to bring in and implement to reduce the risk, the cost of the controls versus the benefits that will be derived if they were to invest in these new controls. Don't worry, we'll talk about a lot of that once we get into the risk management domain itself. So what is the security and risk management lifecycle about? Well, the first step is to assess the risk and determine the needs. What controls are needed? Once a risk assessment has taken place, risks have been identified, they've been analyzed, and risk controls have been implemented, we then monitor and evaluate. We promote awareness implement policies and controls, and then we start all over again. Now, one thing that I would say about this is that when we say we promote awareness of our risks, we need to be careful that we don't disclose information about our risks to the wrong persons, to unauthorized persons. Our risk log should be protected and secured, just like our penetration test reports and other critical information. So when we say promote awareness, it's also awareness on a need to know basis to only persons that need to know what those risks are. So let's say we've had a penetration test or pen test done, and we've been notified from the report that we have XYZ number of critical vulnerabilities. We've got 5 medium vulnerabilities, and then we've got 3 low vulnerabilities, for example. That report does not need to be shared with everybody in the IT team or everyone in the InfoSec team. Doesn't need to be shared with the board or senior management. It only needs to be shared with those who have a need to know the content of that report. And when we're asking IT to implement controls or to fix the vulnerabilities, to fix a critical vulnerability, we again still don't show them the full report, the full pen test report. We simply give that IT engineer the report on the single vulnerability that he or she is required to fix. So there's the security and risk management life cycle, and it goes on and on. So we continually assess risk. We continually identify risk, information security risk to our businesses. We continue to monitor, evaluate. We promote awareness, we implement policies and controls, and then we do that on a daily basis. It's about risk management. Whether you're a technical architect, technical InfoSec architect, or an engineer or a manager, you're just managing risk. You're seeking to reduce the risk to protect your organization. What is the knowledge an InfoSec professional needs to have to be able to do our jobs well, not just to do our jobs? We need to understand the corporate mission and vision of any organization that we're hired to work within. And we'll talk about that at length when we talk about the process in terms of developing an information security strategy, which has to align with the corporate mission and vision. But we need to know what the corporate mission and vision is. What direction are we heading for? What is this company set up to do? We need to understand the processes. What does HR do? What does payroll do? What does the trading floor do? We need to understand all those processes so that we can actually recommend controls, security controls, to support them in what they're doing in a secure manner. We need to understand the people and the culture of the workplace. People and culture, so important. We need to understand tools, different tools that can be used to mitigate risk. We need to understand the customers of the organization that we've been hired to work in. That's also important. Why do we need to understand the customers? Because if you've got customers, for example, that have remote access to your infrastructure, or they are connected, they could pose a risk to your organization. We need to understand the structures in place, who the key stakeholders are within our organization. Again, I remember when I started work in a 150-sited organization across England and Wales about 15 years ago or so. When I started in that organization, each of those 150 sites were a separate entity. They had Hotmail email addresses, AOL email addresses. They had home-built PCs. They had their tiny PCs, Dell PCs, compact PCs. And there was not a single corporate infrastructure. And one of the problems that the organization had, the corporate headquarters now, was that they were trying to get all of these sites to become a single organization, a single named organization. So they'd acquired all of these contracts to deliver services from these 150 sites over the years. And they were now trying to get every single entity out of those 150 to see themselves as one brand. I was hired as the CIO and head of InfoSec, and I immediately took it upon myself to try and identify the structure of the organization and the key players, because I knew that we couldn't get by with simply managing these 150 sites as separate entities from an IT and information security perspective. That was not going to work. So before I was able to implement an Active Directory and virtualized infrastructure, I identified key stakeholders. I set out to understand the structure, identified key regional managers who were also keenly opposed to any attempts to become a centralized entity, not to talk of now joining a centralized infrastructure. And I went on a charm offensive to meet these regional managers, to discuss their fears, to discuss why they didn't want to join the organization, to become a single organization. I listened to them and I put forward my proposals with regards to a single Active Directory network. Once I was able to get the most resistant stakeholders on board, the resistant managers, they then became champions and advocates for IT and information security with their reports. And they were able to bring all the managers and users in the remote sites on board. And in the 9 years that I spent there, the strongest opponents became allies in a personal capacity and also in a professional capacity. And they became champions for information security and IT at the time. So understand the structure, understand the key stakeholders, understand the influencers within your organization. And we have to understand the regulatory environment that we're operating in within our companies. That is essential, the regulatory environment. If we work in the financial services sector, we need to understand what our regulators require of us with regards to information security. If we work in the healthcare sector, again, we need to understand what the healthcare regulators require of us. In the UK, the banking sector, financial services sector is regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority and the Prudential Regulatory Authority. So if you work in that sector, you need to understand what they are saying, what these two regulators are saying about cyber and information security. There's a lot out there currently about third-party risk management and fourth-party risk management and operational resilience, business continuity management, which also may include disaster recovery, ensuring that clients, customers, and employees are not subjected to long-term outages in the event of an interruption, including an interruption like the pandemic. So we need to understand all of these. Understanding information security or wanting to start out as an information security professional is not just about certification, understanding what's in the CISSP Book of Knowledge or understanding what's in the CISM or CISSP Book of Knowledge or any of those. It's about taking a holistic view to our devotion to the industry and reading, conducting research, building on our knowledge on a day-to-day basis so that we can contribute to this fight against cybercrime. Now, when we're talking about M&As, it's important that we take into consideration, as I just mentioned there in my example, information about new technology assets that we're going to need to secure. And information. In many cases, when two companies merge or one company acquires another, they tend to underestimate the effort that will be required to change the culture or merge the culture of each party to their M&A. So it's important that as an information security professional or manager, we start thinking and talking about any additional technologies and information assets that might need to be secured once an M&A has been announced, including in the planning phase. We need to consider new employees that will need to be brought on board, new roles that may need to be created, a new culture that will need to be merged. We need to consider the integration of different systems. And in merging with another company, we may now be subjected to new policies, laws, and regulations as well. So we can't say, that's none of my business. I'm just going into work to do my job and get paid. We need to invest in knowledge. We need to know all of these things. When we talk about restructuring, if an organization is restructuring or it's diversifying into a new industry, or there are redundancies as a result of the restructuring or diversification efforts, then we now have a risk of data leakage. Some ex-employees may choose to send work home to themselves, to their private email addresses that they want to take on to a new employer. They may not be malicious in their intent, but that is still a risk. When a company is restructuring or diversifying, they may need to decouple some systems that have been merged together over the years. There is a risk there of data leakage. There is a risk of breaking something. When restructuring or diversifying as well, there may be a loss of monitoring where senior management no longer have an oversight of the entire infrastructure. That is a risk of disgruntled employees, especially our IT employees and InfoSec employees. And our privileged users. We don't want a disgruntled employee in IT who's been made redundant to plant a Trojan, for example, on our infrastructure, or plant malware on our infrastructure because they have the permissions to do so. They have the authorization, they have the access rights as well. So these are risks that we need to look out for. The risk of insider threats. Then there's also risk of new policies and governance that we need to make ourselves aware of. New rules, new regulations when we're restructuring or we're diversifying into new industries or sectors. What about the Information Security Steering Group, which is part of our governance structure? So what is the role of the Information Security Steering Group? Their role is to establish security governance that addresses the threats to an organization's survivability and profitability. So again, remember, an information security professional's role is to seek to ensure the survivability and profitability of our organizations. Is to seek to do everything within our power to reduce the risk to our organization's survivability and profitability. Even in not-for-profit organizations, we need to reduce the risk to their survival. So what does security governance do? They develop an information security strategy, obtain management commitment. Then assign roles and responsibilities, establish reporting and communication channels, identify any legal issues and assess the impact of regulations on information security within the business. They also establish and maintain security policies, which would most likely be drafted by their CISO, develop procedures and guidelines to support the information security policies, and develop business cases for information security programs. InfoSec professionals, if you're not the CISO, again, learn how the committee works, identify and maintain a key relationship with key stakeholders on that information steering group or committee. It's essential that we maintain relationships across the business so that we can have champions on our side to advocate for us when we're trying to reduce the risk to our organizations. So we maintain relationships, and we educate the committee in InfoSec and risk management. Again, the committee consists, the Information Security Committee, steering committee consists of business managers from all parts of the business. Each department or team will have a representation on that Information Security Committee, who will serve as champions, or they may nominate someone else within their department to serve as an InfoSec champion. Responsibility for InfoSec lies with absolutely everyone within an organization, from the board to the facilities staff, including cleaners, security guards. Everyone bears a responsibility for information security. And once we start letting all our employees know that we cannot do information security without you, we cannot keep you secure without you also making an effort. Once we're able to share that message, we're on to a winner with regards to reducing the threat and the risk to our organization. Responsibility for InfoSec lies with all. If a cleaning staff member were to be cleaning an office in the middle of the night or early morning, before you come into the office, and they see a post-it note with critical information on it, they won't be able to know, in many cases, they may not be able to know that actually that information is critical. They could just screw it up and throw it in a bin bag, and that's the end of that information. They've picked it up off the floor and just tossed it into a bin and then discarded it. That is the destruction of information, which may of course have affected the availability of that information if that information has not also been typed into a system before it was dropped on the floor. So responsibility for InfoSec lies with everyone. Everyone has a role to play, and everyone should be trained in information security, including our facilities staff. So what are the security roles and responsibilities, or some security roles and responsibilities? We've got the head of information security, CISO, InfoSec director. They're responsible for security problems and resolutions. We've got analysts who may sit on the security service desk. They may implement technical security controls and conduct risk assessments. We've got the data owner. Please remember this, the data owner is responsible for classifying and declassifying their own data. Now, I'll stop there for a moment. For financial information produced by the financial department or team, the FD, financial director, may be the data owner, or they may delegate that responsibility to a single individual within the department. The data owner then assigns labels to their data. They could say financial statements confidential, bought ledger information private, purchase ledger information private, invoices private, financial awareness material public. So the data owner classifies the data. They assign labels, sensitivity labels, secret, public, confidential, to their data. For custodians to apply security controls to, who are the custodians? Where they're usually IT/InfoSec. What sort of controls might we apply to classified data? Well, we could apply encryption controls, file encryption to secret information so that no unauthorized user can gain access to that information. We could put some paper information in a safe. We could have multiple backups of classified information to ensure that if the data were inadvertently destroyed, that we can just restore from a backup. So the data owner classifies the data, and then the custodian, which is IT/InfoSec, will apply security controls to that classified data. An auditor assesses compliance with regulations and policy. So we could have an external auditor come in many cases annually. An external auditor will come in and assess the controls in place within IT and InfoSec to see if they actually comply with regulations and with the internal security policies. If our internal security policies say that any financial statement needs to be classified as secret until it's made public, then it's declassified and made and classified as public. If our information security policy states that, and that any secret information is meant to have encrypted software applied to it, access is only via multi-factor authentication, an auditor will come in and they could ask to see this, your financial statements, see which would be masked. So we would actually redact a lot of information from that if we're presenting that to the auditor, by the way, because again, they are subjected to only seeing information on a need to know basis. But if they were to come in and ask, okay, let's see whether this policy is actually being adhered to, we would present them with a redacted version of the financial statements. They would want to see that label secret applied to it. They would then want to see where we have stored it. Have we stored it in a safe, or have we encrypted it? Have we made sure that only parties that are authorized to view this information, this statement, have actually been able to gain access to it over the course of a year? So an auditor assesses compliance with regulations that apply to our company and also compliance with our internal information security policy. What does the CSIRT, Computer Security Incident Response Team, or Computer Emergency Response Team do? Or the Security Operations Center team? What do they do? Well, they're the internal and external critical incidents or events security teams. And they work on incident response, events, emergency events response, emergency events, prevention and advice. They also may be engaged in threat intelligence, monitoring, and reporting internally. So there are a myriad of roles that we can actually play as information security professionals, and there are many more than these. There is plenty of room for any professional who wants to actually make a career in information security. But the only thing that I advise is simply, if you're interested in it, don't go into InfoSec because of the money, rather because of your commitment and interest in reducing risk to organizations and to stopping cybercrime or reducing cybercrime in society. That is my passion, at least. So here's the CISO responsibilities. That is the Chief Information Security Officer responsibilities. They actually determine security and risk mitigation strategies along with their team. They lead the annual information security program. They will educate the senior management team. I've done a lot of that in the past. Budgeting and forecasting. They work hard to obtain the senior management team buy-in. So they present to the senior management team. In some cases, I've been a member of senior management teams, and in other roles, I haven't been a member of the senior management team, even as the CISO, CIO, whatever. It depends on the organization. But needless to say, one of the responsibilities of the CISO is to seek to obtain SMT buy-in, to bring them on board as champions and advocates for information security. The CISO would also lead the crisis management team or the computer emergency response teams, in particular in the event of an emergency or an incident or a critical incident there. The CISO is also responsible for regulatory compliance, ensuring that they first will understand the regulations and that the company complies with the regulations. Now, please note that I've said responsible for. When it comes to regulatory compliance, the CISO is responsible for ensuring that the business complies with regulations, but the board retains accountability for that. So if a company is found to be in breach of regulations, the board / SMT would need to answer to the regulators, not the CISO. But that does not mean that the CISO should not do their job not take their job seriously. If you're hired into a CISO role, treat it as if you're the person accountable to the regulators. Don't go into it just for the title. The CISO also ensures that risk and business impact assessments are conducted to assess the impact, the potential impact on the business in the event of a breach. They maintain an appropriate balance between acceptable risk and business operations. Remember, we said that the board sets the risk appetite, the corporate risk appetite. So the CISO has to ensure that they retain a balance between acceptable risk and normal business operations, because we've all agreed that you cannot do business if you're not prepared to take some risks. The CISO also ensures information is presented to the exec and that the information is factual and based on business needs. A CISO can't be found saying, well, that company had a major breach last week, so we need to procure more firewalls so we don't experience the same breach. If you have adequate controls in place within your business, then you cannot go presenting to the board proposals based on another business's risks. On the other hand, we do need to take into account sector-specific risks. So if there is evidence that cyber criminals are targeting particular banks, small or startup banks or challenger banks, then a CISO may want to actually say to their board, you know what, we need to assess the risk to our bank and conduct a risk assessment based on the controls that we have in place in our bank, and also based on the board's risk appetite, the risks that they have said that they're prepared to tolerate, which could be totally different to the risk of the risk acceptance of the bank, that the challenger bank that has been attacked down the road, that has experienced a breach. So it has to be based upon our own organizational needs. The CISO also ensures that policies, procedures, baseline standards and guidelines address corporate needs, and we will talk about those later. And the CISO needs to measure InfoSec effectiveness. There's no point simply going into work every day without measuring the effectiveness of what we're actually delivering. Are we adding value to the business? I disagree with a lot of professionals, managers, leaders that say that information security and IT is just a cost center, that we don't actually add any value beyond asking for money to secure XYZ and asking for more money to buy this tool and that tool. No, we can add value as InfoSec professionals. We can train our employees beyond the mandatory training. We can train our customers. We can hold workshops with our customers. I once held a workshop with customers of our wholesale customers now of this organization that I worked with, and they wrote into the marketing department after that saying that they'd never attended a cybersecurity workshop like that one that I held and delivered to them in their careers. So we can add value. We add value and then we measure the effectiveness. We measure the value that we're adding to our companies. Plans. So this doesn't just apply to InfoSec plans. This also applies to corporate plans. Strategic planning is long-term planning. And that could be for 3 to 5 years. And when the CISO is drafting the information security plan, that plan needs to align with the corporate 3 to 5 year strategy. If a business says, in 3 years' time, we intend to have grown to a £5 million business, we intend to have hired 500 more employees within 3 years. We intend to have moved to another office or to be spread across 2 offices. The information security plan needs to underpin that plan of moving to 2 offices, for example, where the CISO needs to ride on how InfoSec is going to play a role in terms of securing those 2 offices. If we're growing to 5,500 users, again, InfoSec, the CISO needs to draft a plan that will talk about how we're going to equip those 500 to 5,000 users with secure equipment, mobile devices, enabling secure working. And if the corporate plan then changes midway, the CISO needs to change the information security long-term plan, strategic plan, so that the alignment remains. We cannot have an information security plan that consists of what the CISO thinks the business might need, rather than considering the direction of the senior management team and deriving or drawing up a plan that underpins the direction that the corporate senior management team is heading towards. So strategic planning is long-term planning, tactical planning is mid-term, where an annual information security plan is drawn up that contains a subset of the deliverables from the 3 to 5 year plan. So again, an annual InfoSec plan may contain just details of how we're going to enable 200 out of the 500 employees that were due to come on board within 3 years, how we're going to enable the 200 that are coming in year 1 to work securely. How we're going to consider bring your own device, procure encryption tools. So the tactical plan, which is the mid-term plan, is usually an annual information security plan that contains a subset of deliverables from the 3 to 5 year plan. On rare occasions, we may need to actually introduce something new into our annual plan that wasn't in our 3-year strategic plan. For example, where I worked previously, I remember a regulator, this was years ago again, a regulator came in and said, we need all hard drives encrypted at hard drive level. So we had file encryption in place, and they said that they wanted to see hard drive encryption for all staff. And because we had so many remote sites, I had to draw up a plan for how we were going to successfully encrypt those hard drives remotely. And we did it. But that wasn't a plan that was drafted in the 3-year strategic plan. Actually, it was 5 years in that workplace. It wasn't part of the plan for the 5-year, it wasn't part of the 5-year information security plan, but I just had to take that project on board and draw up a plan for it, a tactical plan, mid-term, because the regulator had come in and demanded that. Sometimes it could be an auditor that comes in and says, okay, we recommend, and this is a strong recommendation, that you actually procure this to reduce the risk to this business unit or to this department or to these information assets. And that plan then just gets added to the tactical plan or information security plan for that year to be delivered. Operational and project planning is short-term, monthly and weekly plans containing a subset of deliverables from the annual information security plan. So these are 3 types of plans that ISC Square recommends. The steering committee, we've talked about this, includes business unit representation, champions InfoSec across business units to all employees, identifies risk and steers risk management actions. So they work with the CISO and any other InfoSec member of the steering committee to identify risk across the business. They help to reach decisions on InfoSec projects, help to prioritize information security initiatives. They review the CISO security policies So the Chief Information Security Officer will prepare policies, and then this will be reviewed at the steering committee, rather than escalate every single decision to the CEO. That decision making takes place, a lot of decision making takes place at the steering committee, of which the CISO, head of information security, is also a member of. They track and audit the annual security program to make sure that these are on track, and that any projects within that program are on track. And if the CISO is having any difficulty, could be because they don't have user buy-in on a new technology that they're trying to implement, then that is raised and discussed within the steering committee. And remember, we've said that each business unit will have a representation there. So if it's found, for example, that if it's been found that HR staff are not using this new security tool, then it could be discussed in the security committee, and then the HR champion takes any decisions back to the HR team, having brought any concerns from the HR team to the same committee to be discussed. So the committee champions organizational security efforts. They go within their different business units and champion information security. And the steering committee would also get involved when it comes to raising, escalating InfoSec programs that require investment to senior management. That's why it's vital that we identify the key stakeholders within the committee and develop a relationship with them. Discuss any concerns with them, and also share information security goals with them. End users, as I said previously, they also have a responsibility for protecting information assets. Their mobile devices, their tablets, their notebooks, they're responsible also for protecting these information assets. They are the first line of defense because they can see what their colleagues are doing, and they also know what they're doing that may be resulting in a risk to the business. For example, writing passwords down on a Post-it note. So end users are the first line of defense in observing and reporting security incidents. And if we genuinely operate a no blame culture, we will find more users willing to come and ask questions of us, or tell us when they've lost their password or left their password on a Post-it note in their drawer and it's disappeared overnight. That is if we genuinely operate a no blame culture. So end users' first line of defense in observing and reporting security incidents. If they've got a team colleague who repeatedly leaves their laptop unlocked for 2 minutes before their automatic screen kicks in, they could raise it. If they raise that, then the business may reach a decision, okay, we need to provide this end user with training, not to blame them, but to train them. To train them or to warn them if what they're doing is in breach of their IT security acceptable user policy, and they have read and signed that acceptable user policy, then we could actually just have a word with them, saying that you are aware that you're not meant to leave your screen unlocked. So could you not do that in future? That's after training. The end user is also reportedly the weakest link in the fight against social engineering and phishing attacks, because they're more likely to fall prey to social engineering and phishing attacks. So with our end users, as I've said previously, there's a constant need of role-based training and team-based training and awareness. A reminder again to not forget the cleaner and the security guard, who are essential tools in the fight against cybercrime. I've provided focused training to boards as well, because they're more susceptible to whaling attacks and spear phishing attacks, where some have previously been persuaded to send funds to bogus cyber criminals. So the training must be focused on the target group based on the roles. There's no point providing phishing training to the cleaning staff who may not have access to a computer in their company. We may want to provide them with awareness on that, but in terms of spending corporate time training end users on security concepts, that will never happen to them within the confines of their company time or corporate network, is really a waste of their investments in information security. So when we talk about whaling, I've just mentioned whaling attacks and spear phishing attacks against CEOs and senior managers, who sometimes will end up diverting millions to a cyber criminal. You won't offer that training to an InfoSec officer, for example, within the InfoSec team, except in the concept of general awareness, because that InfoSec officer will never have access to the funds to finance folders to enable them to transfer millions out of the company. So targeted training, team-focused training and awareness is what we're required to deliver in our companies. What do the ExCo do and senior management? Well, they set the long-term corporate strategic plan, which I said earlier, needs to be underpinned by their information security strategic plan. So the ExCo senior management also approve the InfoSec policies and plans that underpin their corporate strategic plan. They also provide resources to security efforts, including financial resources and human resources, and they support and champion any changes. They assign the CISO's responsibilities and approve the appointment of a CISO. They establish the corporate risk appetite. How much risk are we prepared to tolerate to actually continue to do business? They obtain ongoing assurance from auditors. and they're accountable to regulators and shareholders for InfoSec and visibly support. So they don't just quietly support information security, they are visible and they are vocal in terms of supporting and championing information security initiatives. That's what the EXCO and senior management do. The CCERT, CERT, SOC teams, mentioned this briefly already. They're responsible for security incident response and investigations after an incident. They're also ready to spring into action to manage an incident once an incident has been declared or an emergency. Some may be responsible for forensic analysis and malware analysis. So they actually assess any information, emails, and any files, folders on the network for malware signs. Inbound emails that may appear suspicious. They prepare for incidents as well. And then when an incident occurs, they then contain the incident, try to limit the spread of the incident, that is. So if there's a ransomware attack, for example, they will try as much as possible to limit the spread of that ransomware attack, to limit the impact of it. Then they will now eradicate, that is, remove the threat, remove the malware. And then they will now recover the business and systems to where it was before the incident occurred. They also do threat intelligence. They monitor security and incident and events that are logged within tools. They also will develop cybersecurity incident playbooks, which is a playbook on what happens in the event this incident were to occur. Develop cybersecurity incident playbooks, and they're also responsible for intrusion prevention, detection, and analysis. Now, the role of the information security analyst is varied. It's just really varied. And you look at role profiles, you look at job descriptions, information security analysts, you could be responsible for vulnerability assessments, remediation, could be responsible for information security projects, application security, vendor, third-party risk assessments. You could be responsible for drafting policies, standards, and guidelines, and then the CISO then approves them. Could be responsible for incident tracking, logging, and escalation, service desk, exception requests, where a user requests for permissions to do something which is not granted to everyone across the business. So they would be required to go for a formal exception request process, which could either be approved or denied. We've talked about data information owners, usually senior managers and business unit managers. They're responsible for determining the data and information classification level. They review their data, and they actually oversee the implementation of security controls. So whilst information security, InfoSec teams and IT teams will implement the security controls such as data encryption, backups, the data owner still retains oversight and maintains oversight to ensure that the security controls are actually applied to their classified information. So they still own the responsibility to make sure that, okay, I've prepared these financial accounts, these financial statements of accounts, and I have labeled this as secret. Is IT and InfoSec backing up this data? Has it been encrypted? Has this file been encrypted? Is this information only accessible to the CEO, the board, and me, the financial director or CFO? So the data information owner still needs to retain that oversight. They determine who gets access or not, how frequently the file or folder is backed up, and they act on security violation notifications. So if they find out that the folder that the financial statements, the secret financial statements is stored in, is accessible to everyone, they would contact the IT and ask questions and ask that this is fixed to ensure that the folder is secured and that no unauthorized users are able to gain access to the folder. What does the data stroke information custodian do? They secure and maintain the information provided to them by data owners, make sure that they protect information from unauthorized access and modifications. They perform the actual backups or restorations. And it's vital that if we're responsible for backing up data, please let's make sure that we test our ability to restore the information in the event of an outage. Because I know a lot of IT backup engineers will turn around and say, well, at least we know that the backup works, which is a good thing because you run your backups every evening. And of course, if the backup hasn't run, then you will get notified by the backup software. However, it's equally important that we test our ability to restore that information in the event of a disruption. We know the backup works, but we need to test the restoration of that information periodically to ensure we're able to restore the information. The data stroke information custodian also monitors information systems to ensure compliance with the information security policy and standards and classifications. So a custodian takes care of things. And that is what the data or information custodian does. They take care of information security, apply the controls. And the auditor, as we've said, does the compliance assessments and provide assurance reports to senior management about the adequacy of the security controls in place. Do the controls that have been applied, such as encryption, antivirus software, backups, do those, are they effectively mitigating the risk to the business? So when the auditor comes in, that's what they're there to assess. Are the security controls in place adequate? Are they actually reducing the risk, or are they actually just being applied for the sake of things? Business continuity planner, they plan for contingencies, they plan for disasters, and they plan for incidents and for crises. Business continuity is different to disaster recovery business continuity plans towards the eventuality of any business interruption, including sickness, a pandemic, a riot, a fire, any business interruption, whereas disaster recovery is about IT recovery, the recovery of the infrastructure in the event of an incident. Crisis management, we need senior management teams to understand their roles and responsibilities in the event of a crisis. So your crisis management team consists of a technical team, all right, an information security team, but also consists of senior management, including a manager who will communicate with the media in the event of a major outage. I often talk about two companies, the tale of two companies, one being TalkTalk, where they had a security incident many years ago now, and the CEO, unfortunately, wasn't able to articulate what exactly they were doing about the incident. And the company was punished for that outage for years, in that its share price never recovered to the pre-incident price. On the other hand, JP Morgan had a security incident, a security breach, just a few years after the TalkTalk event. The CEO, whom I admire so much for his ethics, integrity, and a lot of other things, but the CEO was able to go onto TV and to articulate exactly what they were doing. He exuded control. He gave a briefing that suggested to investors and customers and employees that there was no need to panic. And so most people didn't actually hear about that breach. So when we're talking about the crisis management team, the press or media spokesperson has to be someone who's going to be able to reassure customers that the business remains in control. A confident and trained spokesperson. So those are certain roles. We've also got the security administrator. Again, the security administrator, information security analyst, all of these are really titles. So a security administrator could be there to grant user access requests, privileges management, accounts administration, including for movers and leavers. That's employees move into new roles within the company, and leavers, employees leaving the companies. They can log and report on access rights granted and revoked. So that is all we have for today, and we'll resume in 2 days' time, where we'll start taking a look at controls. Thanks so much for attending, and I look forward to seeing you at the next session.